My name is Laura Higgins. I'm here from the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. I'm the session moderator for our session on stakeholder perspectives. We have 5 speakers in this session. So let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Michel Bedard, who is our first speaker. Let me get his slideshow started here.
Well, thank you. My pleasure to be here. Good afternoon. This is a presentation actually that originated with what I call the DuPont Circle Gang, which is basically Jude Charlton here, Jenny Oxley, both from Monash University Accident Research Center, Lisa Molnar, our very own from here, and myself from Lakehead. And I say that DuPont Circles because we tend to hang around there when we go to TRB in January pretty much every year. So, and that's why we always meet for breakfast, no other times, and discuss research. So anyway, so this was something we talked about, you know, how can we kind of continue moving research in terms of older drivers ahead, and I think the idea came to, what are some 10 things we could say that we know for sure and we can actually use to move research further. And I think you all know that we're very keen about, you know, senior drivers. I think we all agree that it's important for the independence, quality of life, but we also know that there are safety issues, both for them and for the other road users. And we certainly know that there's been a tremendous increase in research about older drivers in recent years. And what we did is simply put in older drivers into PubMed search. And these are the number of publications that came at 5 different years since 1975. And you can see that there's literally an explosion of research. And that's a very small proportion because, again, it's just PubMed and just for older drivers. So you can see there's an explosion of research when it comes to older drivers. And I think it's time to kind of somewhat reflect on where we're going and also realize that the research field has certainly matured a lot in terms of the type of research, the sophistication of research, again, all this, what we heard this morning about long road study, and certainly the CAN drive that have been part of us, and actually many of us, and the OSCAN drive have been part of, I think attests to the maturity of the research and the sophistication of the designs. But I think we kind of thought, let's think about some stuff that we already know, and we can actually kind of look at and then kind of reflect on and certainly hope to spur the research in a new direction and move quickly. So what we did really, and that's very scientific, so it basically consisted by 4 researchers, and that's the 4 of us. It's basically a mini review if you want in some of those things. So I can't go into much depth about all those different things, those 10 different statements, because you can imagine how long that would take. And I'll present those 10 facts. The order is not particularly reflecting of the importance. I'm sure that you could all come up with many different facts that we could add to that list. And actually, that could be interesting to do in itself. And also, I just have one reference for all these things, but you can imagine gazillions of reference supporting some of those statements. And if you don't see your name, don't take it personally. We just put something there. So, fact number 1, actually, this is almost more like a philosophical point than a research point, but mobility is a right. And again, mobility we tend to define as the ability to go where we want to go, whenever we want to go, this kind of broad kind of thing. But driving is a privilege. And again, that's something that we need to continue emphasizing, certainly for some of our seniors who don't always realize, and more often men and women, don't often realize that it's actually really a privilege, not a right to drive. We know the proportion of older drivers increasing in developed countries. So again, it's going really quickly. There was a point where maybe 70% of seniors 65 and over were licensed. Now we're approaching a point where pretty much every senior over 65 will be licensed. A lot of it has been also increased in terms of women being licensed and women driving more. So that's certainly changing rapidly in most of our countries. This one, we've come up with it's simplistic and misleading to say we have an older driver problem. There's many different ways to think about older drivers, and certainly one of the things that I've faced early in my own home province and country is the use, for example, of fatalities as an index that we have an older driver problem. Fatalities are a reflection as much of frailty and the inability to sustain kind of the trauma of crashes as it is in people being involved in crashes in the first place. So there's all sorts of reasons why statistics are changing and our perspective is changing, but I think it's very kind of certainly very simplistic to think of an older driver problem. We have some important cohort effects emerging, and again, we've seen that in some of our own work. We've noticed that current or coming generation of older drivers tend to be safer than the prior generations of older drivers. So there's a lot of change. So I think that we have to, again, anticipate what's going to happen and not make assumptions about the coming generation of older drivers. And that's kind of very self-serving for me because I'm getting that point, not the rest of my colleagues on that particular presentation, but for me, I'm getting closer and closer to those seniors. So I think the generations are changing, and I think we have to, again, that's something we have to look at and also take into consideration. This one we tend to be pretty strong about. So no screening approach can identify safe or unsafe drivers with accuracy for general use in older populations. So I think one thing we've realized is there's not a single tool that will give you an answer as to whether somebody should drive or not. We realize that it's going to have to be a combination of tools that will help you in different process, whether it's serial trichotomization or a risk stratification tool like we're trying to do with CanDrive. But you're not going to have a simple screening approach to tell you who can drive, who cannot drive, unless somebody is at very extreme situation. If you have somebody with a mean mental of 5, yeah, they can't drive, but it's not going to be used for screening. And there's also issues in terms of using tools that have been developed with populations at risk and using those tools in the general population, then we increase the risk of false positive in those situations. So there's lots of stuff to think about here. I think we very well know that some medical conditions may adversely affect safe driving. We like to emphasize this is regardless of age. So some people may have medical conditions that are important that will affect their driving, their safe driving. You can think of epilepsy, for example, but there's lots of medication. Again, we heard that earlier with Linda. The importance of separating the effect of medications from that of the medical illnesses as well is something that's becoming very important. So very important issue here. Crashes involving older drivers are different in other age cohorts. So again, we tend to know that. So again, the question is, how do we move further? And we've seen a lot of interest, for example, in some of those technologies that may allow senior drivers to drive more effectively, to change lanes more effectively, and so on and so forth. So I think we know that things are different. So the question is, how do we tackle the problem next? And we don't need to kind of go over this very much anymore, but how do we come up with interventions? Thank you. 5 minutes. I'm going to be done even before that. How can we actually get on to kind of reducing those particular crashes? Again, the interventions part will be interesting. And I always remind me when I was doing quite a bit of research with caregiving, at one point we kind of realized, like, well, we know that caregiving can be quite, straining on people. So the question is, how do we come up with interventions to reduce the strain? We don't need to demonstrate anymore that caregiving is difficult. Safe driving results from a combination of skill, behavior, and appropriate decision making. Again, there's a lot about driving, which contribute to the safe aspects of it. And again, decision making is a big deal. We always talk about when I talk to young drivers, particularly, I say often crashes have to do with poor decision making, when you shouldn't drive, for example, what you shouldn't be doing, and of course we've got additive compensation strategy, but again, that's a good sign of decision making, that if somebody's skills are deteriorating, then they can use compensation strategy. So again, there's lots of stuff about that we can, as drivers, all of us, change. And that leads me to fact number 9, which is that older drivers, certainly healthy older drivers, can improve their performance. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that's come up over the last few years, clearly identifying that drivers can actually drive better. We still need more evidence about, does it affect crashes, does it affect their driving pattern and so on, but there's certainly a lot of evidence that they can be better drivers. And again, that could apply to all of us, but we can actually work on that and build on that particular body of evidence. And the last one, I think it's self-evident. I think you all know about it. So driving is important to older adults, quality of life. And again, I think we have to kind of really look at how do we allow people to drive as long as they can, as safely as possible, if they want to. But eventually we'll have to look at the old issue of transitioning, and how do we make the transition less difficult and easier, and how do we emphasize the positive of the transitioning. So again, when it comes to planning new research, we've got to ask ourselves, well, first, how will the research benefit older adults? Because I think we should keep older adults in the back of our mind. And how will the research actually move us forward? So it's nice to answer also the question, but how is the research moving us forward? Does it provide answer to a key question that we have, or does it represent an important replication? And the idea of replication is always in the back of our mind, because I think we know the scientific method operates with replications. We're not in a world where we can just do one study, and we know that often there could be multiple biases in a particular study, so we can't just do one study and say we've got the evidence we need to move forward. So replications are an important piece of the world, and I think we have to continue doing those important replications without spending too much time on those obvious things that we know by now. Thank you for your assist, for you being here, for listening to me, and a special thank to Rebecca Scott, who helped me put that presentation together.
Have any questions?
John.
Can you go back to the slide about screening? So I'm just confused why I'm not understanding this, but why, how do you know no screening approach will ever be able to identify?
Yeah, okay, well, I think what I really mean is a particular tool. We won't get a tool that will allow us to be good at screening. A single tool, if you want, is the more precise way here.
So you're saying no single screening approach?
Yeah, okay, what we mean, no single tool, sorry, thank you for clarifying. So no single tool will allow us to properly, again, except unless you got somebody at tool extreme of.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.